Thomas, Olympe, Olauder, Godwin and I exited to the street from number 72.
"Hi. The air is fresh,"
said Thomas, closing the door behind me.
"I shall miss her,"
he said with a sigh.
Do you intend to leave Monsieur Paine?
asked Olympe. Nodding in reply, Olympe and I linked arms and wandered along the cobblestone under the shadow of the Golden Dome. Joseph existed not in solitary in St. Paul's churchyard. Booksellers and small apartments lined its streets, though. The buildings appeared small in stature compared to the Church of St. Paul. Men and women strolled past us, walking every which way, as the hive of activity bloomed near St. Paul's every afternoon and evening.
Is it always like this?
asked Olympe. I replied.
It is, a huge dome.
It is rather grandiose, isn't it? Quite unnecessary. But it is quite easy to find your way here from anywhere in London, at least. We walked along its northern side and admired the intricate detail of the church's exterior. Christopher Wren is the man who designed it. Olympe stopped for a moment and stared at the top of the church. Its cross stands proudly atop the dome.
It is quite beautiful,
she said, straining her neck to take in the view of the entire building. Come, let me show you my favourite view. We continued strolling a little west along St. Paul's churchyard, leaving Olauder, Godwin and Paine behind. Okay, now close your eyes, this way. I turned her around to face the church, some 300 metres away, glowing in the winter's afternoon light. Now open. She paused for a moment before opening her eyes. She took a deep breath before speaking in her French-laden English accent I came to admire throughout the evening.
It is beautiful, Mary. I appreciate it from this distance, rather than up close.
I nodded as I too soaked in the building's view underneath the English sky. The buildings surrounding the church appeared infantile compared to the monstrosity before us. It is important to gain a perspective from whatever is in your view. It lets you appreciate it more.
You're writing?
I was more thinking of the church at this present moment. I laughed. But now you mention the situation, I guess you are perhaps right. I often take slight breaks between writing, otherwise my head is all jumbled.
Me also. Otherwise the words become the same.
We intertwined our arms again and started on our way back to number 72. Will you return to France soon? I asked as we made our way around small puddles of yesterday's rain.
Soon.
You must visit when you are in London again, perhaps. We both nodded at another pair of women walking arm in arm.
Perhaps. I do not know when I will come back.
Olympe's eyes found the ground and mine returned to the dome. I fantasized what it would be like to view London from atop in the sky. View the chimneys poking their tall necks from buildings like reeds of grass along the Thames. Well, when you do, we shall make dinner at Joseph's and discuss everything. You will have to tell me all about Paris.
Why you do not come to Paris?
We stopped short of the door of number 72. I do not. No. I haven't considered it.
Well, you must visit.
Olympe's eyes widened and she smiled at the thought.
Come, the others I think are inside.
We returned to the dining room and sat down in the middle of a conversation, or more perhaps, a lecture from Paine.
The origin of the government of England, so far as relates to what is called its line of monarchy, being one of the latest, is perhaps the best recorded. Those bands of robbers parcelled out the world and divided it into dominions.
Joseph, William, Helen and Olauder began eating their desserts as Thomas Paine continued.
Where is the pudding?
A familiar voice called from the kitchen. Henry. My stomach sank like a ship crashing down from a wave.
Why is he regularly late? He practically lives here, doesn't he just?
They so began, these robbers, as is typically the case, to quarrel with each other.
Like all families,
said Olauder.
Quite right. People saw what was first acquired by violence as something they could lawfully take. Thus, like children taking small wooden toys from each other, they alternately invaded the dominions each assigned himself. And the brutality with which they treated each other explains the original character of European monarchy. The conqueror considered the conquered not as his prisoner, but as his property. He led him in triumph, rattling in chains, and doomed him, at pleasure, to slavery or death. As time obliterated the history of their beginning, their successors assumed new appearances to cut off the entail of their disgrace. But their principles and objects remained the same. What at first was plunder assumed the softer name of revenue, and the power seized, they were destined to inherit.
From such beginnings of government, what could be expected but a continued system of war and extortion?
Asked William. I sighed in agreement with him.
Right. Pudding acquired.
Henry Fuseli waltzed into the darkened dining room, placed his small bowl of rice pudding on the table, and began devouring it. Olympe and I stared in awe, mine an admiration of sorts. Her expression resembled one more of disturbance.
Why would the farmer,
Thomas continued,
lay aside his peaceful pursuit of the plough and go to war with the farmer of another country? What inducement has the manufacturer? What is dominion to them, or to any class of men in a nation? Does it add an acre to any man's estate, or raise its value? Are not conquest and defeat each of the same price, and tax is the never-failing consequence? Nevertheless, this reasoning may be good for a nation. It is not so for a government. War is the pharaoh table of governments and nations, the dupes of the game.
There must be some form of government, no?
All hereditary government is, in its nature, tyranny. A heritable crown, or a heritable throne, or by what other fanciful name such things may be called, have no other significant explanation than mankind is heritable property. To inherit a government is to inherit the people as if they were flocks and herds. Mr. Godwin?
Thomas turned to William, who was halfway through eating his rice pudding.
Can you explain the 4 forms of government for me?
Stunned, Godwin struggled to find his voice.
Democratical, aristocratical, and monarchical, and...
The representative, I added.
Thank you.
He nodded.
What is called a republic is not any particular form of government. Res publica, the public affairs or the public good, or, literally translated, the public thing. It is a word of a good origin, referring to what ought to be the character and business of government. And in this sense, it is naturally opposed to the word monarchy, stemming from signification. It means arbitrary power in a person, in the exercise of which himself, and not the res publica, is the object. America, which is wholly on the system of representation, is the only real republic in character.
The front door to Joseph's store burst open and a loud, booming voice shouted from down the stairs.
Joseph! They're coming!
In a flurry of movement, Joseph stashed his pamphlets under the table. Olympe seated herself upright, and all our eyes fixed on Joseph.
Oh, for heaven's sake, again.
Joseph pointed to the rear of the dining room.
Thomas, take the back lanes and...
Joseph could not find any more words to placate a frantic Thomas. 60 Shore Street, I said. Tell my maid I sent you. She will let you in. They won't think to search my apartment. This is the first time I have met you. Thomas nodded and exited in a flurry. Am I to go with him, sir?
No, Mary, wait here until they go.
Thomas returned in a flurry and bumped into the table and knocked over a candle.
Where the bloody hell is Shore Street?
Godwin and Olympe's eyes darted between Thomas, myself, and Joseph as everyone fussed over the wax and small flame.
Oh, sorry, Joseph.
Accidents happen, it's okay, do not worry.
Sir, do I go with him? Joseph shook his head in reply. Thomas, once you reach the back lanes, wait for me. I will accompany you once they leave. Hide in the shadows or something. Thomas turned and dashed the way he escaped moments before.
I just started my pudding.
Joseph rolled his eyes and nudged Henry out of his chair.
You,
said Joseph, pointing to Henry. And
sit where Thomas sat.
Henry took his bowl and, with his spoon in his mouth, made his way to the head of the table.
Some time today, Henry, for goodness sake.
He hummed a small tune as he waltzed around the table and sat down like a drunken king, right beneath his god-awful painting.
There is wax on the floor, sir.
Olympe, Helen, are you both okay to stay here a while? I asked.
Oui, madame, I am okay.
She straightened her dress and adjusted her golden hair as her eyes darted around the room. The next minute passed in a flurry as Anne cleaned Henry's small mess of pudding and removed any traces of Thomas Paine.
Is there a Mr. Joseph Johnson present?
A voice announced from downstairs.
Yes.
We have reports of a Mr. Thomas Paine in your presence. May we enter?
Of course,
Said Joseph, readjusting himself in his wooden chair. 3 men arose from downstairs, entering the dining room and with an air of palpable authority, and blocked the stairs with their backs.
Paine, is he here?
Asked one of them.
Is he in London?
Asked Joseph as one man gawked at Olympe.
Madam,
The bigger of the men asked.
have you seen Mr. Thomas Paine?
Non, monsieur, I have not observed Monsieur Paine.
The last I heard he was in America. At the mention of the name, the shorter of the 3 spat onto the floor.
We have on authority Mr. Paine walked the streets this evening and entered this building,
Said the smaller of the 3 men.
Your source must be misguided.
Said Joseph.
These fine people are dining with me here tonight, but Thomas Paine is not on the list.
A small smile appeared at the corner of William Godwin's face.
If you see him, will you give him my regards? Now can we return to our fine dinner this evening?
The 3 men said nothing. Instead, they searched every crevice of the small upstairs rooms and in Anne's kitchen, opening up soup lids and throwing items about.
He's a small man, but not that small,
Said Godwin. Olympe and I suppressed a laugh. Wafts of cigars and brandy drifted behind the 3 men as they trampled through Johnson's upstairs living quarters, thrusting things behind them in their aftermath.
You?
Said the smaller one to a louder.
What are you doing here?
He is here on business, I said. Who are you to ask questions? Joseph eased his jacket collar. You waltz in here and trash my employer's residence. Thomas Paine is not here. Never was. I stood from my chair as a clang from the kitchen boomed into the silence. Would you please do us a kind favour and leave? You have no business here. I pointed to the downstairs door as the smaller of the 2, a young man only 20 or so, could not find the words to reply to me. Well? A saucepan lid circled a few times on the floor and stopped, breaking the room into complete silence.
Come on, boys. This one is in a right mood. Bet you're a right fit to keep round the house, eh, miss?
The older of the 3 bumped into Henry's head as the 3 descended downstairs and outside onto St. Paul's churchyard. We glanced at the kitchen as Olympe, Olaudah and I rushed to help Anne pick up any sharp pieces from the floor as silence befell upon the rest of the guests. Who were those men? I called out to no one in particular.
Joseph's friends.
Replied Henry. His smile floated through his words.
Oh, I am joking, Joseph. Come now.
Pitt's dogs.
Said Joseph.
The Prime Minister must have received word he's preparing to print the second part, and I'd rather think they would not like it to occur.
We retired to the dining room and each posted ourselves in our original seats.
They have visited me before.
You have never mentioned anything of the sorts to me.
I did not want you to worry. I'm not printing it so they cannot do anything, Mary. They want him. You heard what he was harping on about tyranny and all the rest. He might as well call for Burke's head at this rate.
Joseph stood from his chair and paced around the table, picking up the strewn papers.
Anyway, Mary, wait a few moments, retrieve your coat and leave. William, accompany Mary home, if you please. Helen, you stay here for a while.
But...
It is for your safety and his. Olympe, you walk with Olaudah to your hotel.
Everyone nodded in agreement. Godwin and I locked eyes. The man appeared indifferent to life. Heaven knows why he bothered. We said goodbye to Henry, Helen, Joseph and Anne, and Godwin, Olaudah, Olympe and I scurried down the stairs and into the frigid air of a London evening.
Au revoir, madame,
said Olympe, bowing as she walked with Olaudah towards the church. Adieu. Godwin and I rounded Joseph's building and met Paine in the darkened laneway. With our agreement made in whispers, we travelled home west for over an hour, the usual route I would take being almost half the distance. We entered my small apartment and I placed myself on the chair and let my body relax. Put your coats and things by the door. I'll see to it the fire is on soon. Anna? Anna made her way downstairs and began lighting the fire.
You okay, miss?
Asked Anna.
I was getting a little worried, madam.
I am fine, thank you, dear. This is William, and this is...
Edward, pleasure to meet you.
Thomas extended his hand to Anna, who stood and bowed in response and then returned to lighting the fire. So, I said, Joseph shall not publish it then. Thomas and William placed themselves on the opposite sofa and sank into a slight rest.
No,
replied Thomas, sighing as he did.
Our mutual friend found the prospect of publishing my treasonous work a sort of brash idea. I do not blame him.
Thomas half smiled and leant further back into his seat.
Some visitors of sorts came to remind Mr. Johnson of his place. One would assume some printer hand is spreading rumours as to what is contained in the second part.
And what is in this second part, Nim?
Asked William. The small flames cast a warm glow illuminating his eyes.
An attack on the foundations of the English government. This government founded itself from an invasion and conquest of the country.
You speak of William of Normandy, I asked.
Precisely. And Magna Carta was only compelling the government to renounce a part of its assumptions. Mr. Burke, he is a stickler for monarchy, not altogether as a pensioner if he is one, which I believe, but as a political man. His contemptible opinion of mankind, who in their turn are taking up the same of him.
Godwin appeared perturbed by the prospect of Thomas Paine in my dining room.
Will you speak at the Corresponding Society, on America and such things?
Aye, it is to be. Say, Mrs. Wollstonecraft, are you or are you not publishing your book soon? You can come and speak. I shall much prefer it indeed.
Whilst I'm sure it would be quite the riveting spectacle, women do not speak at such things.
I am most certain he was reading it at the table at supper. Thomas sunk further into the small armchair as though it moulded to his being. The small room, bar from a few items of furniture, was not equipped for parties larger than two, for my pecuniary measures would not allow.
Mr. Paine, women do not usually speak at these meetings. Have you not a...
Godwin avoided my gaze and focused solely on Paine.
Aye, William. But I shall have you know Mrs. Wollstonecraft here is particularly more articulate than I. What say you?
Thomas stared at me in expectation. Me? I replied.
Aye. Come. It shall be grand, shall it not?
And speak.
Aye. You saw what happened just now.
Thomas's gaze moved to the flickering fire, as did Godwin, who had altogether frozen in place.
Decide in the morning, then. I require sleep.
They will not allow it,
said Godwin, adding a small peppering of emotion to his words. He gestured to the small kitchen as Thomas Paine began to drift away into a peaceful sleep.
Mary,
whispered Godwin.
It is madness. It is for men, not women, to speak.
I care and consider your opinion with the weight of a feather. Have we not recently made acquaintance? He considered his reply for a moment.
Well, yes. May I have this?
Godwin reached for a piece of bread strewn about the counter. Nodding in reply, we leant against my small kitchen table and stared at Thomas Paine, only a few metres away. What are we going to do with him? Sighing, Godwin continued chewing his bread, still bereft of thought and emotion. He won't be able to stay in London, I continued. Any rational creature will recognise his face, and I am persuaded there are spies in London crawling around every street.
You're right there, which is why you should not speak at this thing.
Did you not eat your soup? I asked as he swallowed the last piece of bread.
You have been to his dinners before tonight, haven't you?
His mouth half full. Yes.
Well, then you must have experienced how awful his soups are.
I let out a small giggle. He does it on purpose.
On purpose?
So his guests eat less, talk more. I tapped the side of my temples. For the second time this evening, a smile cracked from the corner of his lips.
Genius, the man is a genius.
Godwin continued eating small pieces of bread whilst we postulated thoughts in silence together. As Thomas Paine continued to drift off to sleep and the crackling fire filled the silence between us, I wagered for a moment whether continuing the conversation with the gentleman was worth my vexation.
Well, I should be off, Jim.
Thank the heavens.
Thank you for the bread.
Godwin made way for the door and adjusted his coat. And Thomas? We both held each other's gaze. What do I do with him?
Send him round to his apartment in the morning, Mrs. Wollstonecraft. Good evening to you.
he said as he exited into the night.